I actually don't know if I'm live on Twitch. Oh, I didn't set up. Okay. My chat in the corner is only gonna have YouTube. That's fine. Wait. Reload player. The video download was cancelled. What are we talking about? Session. Okay. Live unstable. Average stream bitrate. I might need to restart. Oh no. Oh no. What should my bitrate be? Hello. I'm trying to multi-stream, but I think... What should my bitrate be? What? 5,000? Why do I have it at 15,000? Oh my god. Play. Okay. Did I like break everything or no? Hello? Did I indeed break everything? Interesting. Am I streaming on Twitch right now? I think somebody just has to tell me. Oh my god. Hold on. Channel. What the? Oh my lord. I don't think I am. I don't know. For me, it's not working. Five Mbps. Stop. Start. Now does it work? It does! Oh my god! I did it. I'm multi-streaming. Oh, finally. I'm so good. I'm so good. Okay. I actually... Let's see. I am streaming. I am streaming on Twitch, finally. How beautiful. Hooray. Soda! Okay. You guys know when, like, when Joe Biden was like, Minnesota? I hope everybody knows what I was talking about. I feel like BoJack Horseman explaining his own jokes. Alright. I have the cool camera today. Oh, yeah. I was looking back at my last stream. What was it? The mic was terrible. Also, my writing was terrible. I thought it was like fine, but it was actually horrible. So I'll write better. I'm actually not too bad at writing. Soda. Holy, bro. I want to start my own notebook line because every notebook I've ever had is just not good enough. Like, they need to be able to fold over if they're for notes. If it's for a journal, then they can't fold over. I'm genuinely for serious. I would make like 5 different notebooks, all with 5 different specialties, just because like these are not ideal. Alright. We're gonna reread this Buddhist one because I didn't get it completely. I think I've only just scratched the surface of understanding it. It seems really complex, so it's just what I'm ideally trying to do is make something that's really complex into something that's really simple and nice to learn about. Okay. All right. Cool setup, damn. I hope you got your water and any addictive substance you would like to feel a little cozy for the stream today. Hello. All right. Today we're going to be focusing on the Buddhism theory of identity. See, the problem is, I feel like if I write slow, I write better, but if I write fast, it looks ugly and nobody can really read what I'm saying. Okay. So, Anātman, the Buddhist doctrine of the no-self. To be honest, like, that name just reminds me of Ant-Man. I'm very tempted, but I don't want to, like, offend anybody who's actually Buddhist. Let me put on music! Oh my god! I forgot. Don't worry. There we go. There we go. Doot, 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 doot. Oh. Here we go. This is one of my favorite songs on the Amori playlist, by the way. Alright. Often misunderstood as denying personhood, denying consciousness, the Buddhist doctrine of no-self simply aims to deflate the grasping ego. The grasping ego as in the concrete definition of the self. Defining yourself as a bad person, a good person, someone who's successful, not successful, things like that. The teachings of the Buddha have one core purpose: to eradicate dukkha, otherwise known as suffering, but otherwise better described as disappointment, unfulfilled hopes, and unhappiness. Perfect. Explainer. The path to ending dukkha lies in facing up to and correcting our false beliefs about the world and false beliefs about the self. One of our most prominent and damaging misconceptions about reality is our confused notion of self, By deflating our conventional notion of self and understanding what we really are, the Buddha argues we can undermine dukkha and live more tranquil lives. I feel like this is really the foundation or overall premise of Buddhism. It's very much how they're describing it. You do not really exist, as in the concept that we are familiar with. On the face of it, the Buddha's concept of Anātman, no self, seems a very strange view, for our sense of self is surely one of the most familiar things to us. But there's lots of misunderstanding about what the Buddha really means here. Indeed, there is much discussion within Buddha itself about what Anātman entails. A vast literature sits on top of the Buddha's original insights. Yes. I think the immediate reaction is like, well, do I have memories then? Don't I have emotions? Don't I have thoughts? If there's no concept of I, then like, what does this mean? But I imagine no self, and what I've researched on my own does actually include memories and perceptions. Oh, I need to mute this on like my end. Oh my god. Actually, my headphones are over here. Bro, I need to wear my cat thing too. I could probably just like... there we go. Where? Over here. Excuse the interruptions. Excuse the interruptions, my dear friends. Worry not, we'll be on to the concept right now. I'm getting cozy and you can get cozy as well. I invite you to do so. Alright. Okay. Firstly, it's important to understand the historical context in which the Buddha was operating. It was a reaction to the Brahmanic tradition. I don't know anything about the Brahmanic tradition. As a precursor to modern Hinduism, dominant in 500 BCE India. Within this tradition, the concept of Anātman, a permanent self or soul, permanence, is crucial. With his concept of Anātma, then, the Buddha is not necessarily denying the convention of people. He is specifically targeting the Brahman concept of Atman, which involves a persisting essence or substance of self. I think the Atman is referring to this belief that there's like some divine self underneath us, in which we must try as hard as possible to strive towards alignment towards. I think this was very popular in the last few years in the spirituality space, kind of like higher self. That was the term that was used, aligning with your higher self. And to be honest, I use this concept a lot as well. So I wonder what this theory of identity says about that. I do honestly believe in some persisting essence that a person has close to the soul, something divine, something like a higher self. And I usually define that through like just natural inclinations and things about you that you cannot really explain. And I wonder, I have no idea what they'll say about that. With his concept of Anātman, then, okay, we just read that. Which involves a persisting essence or substance of self. This may make us think more of the Christian notion of soul than our everyday notion of self. But the Buddha's view has important repercussions for both. For whether we call it soul or self, the Buddha thinks the reference of I, you, he, she have no real permanence. They don't exist in the way we might think they do. The autobiographical, continuous self, the you of last week, yesterday, and today is just a convention, an invented simplification, a convenient and complacent way to refer to what is in reality a set of immeasurable, complex, and ever-changing processes. Okay, so in reality, a set of immeasurable. So Anātman has to be something that's immeasurable. Measurable and ever-changing. Ever-changing. Think about it. We are changing every second of every day. Our thoughts, desires, mood, memories, the hair on our heads, the nails in our fingers and toes, the cell of our bodies, all is in flux. So what makes the you of today the same as the you of, say, 10 years ago? The Buddha's answer is, well, beyond the casual chain linking you in time, nothing, because the concept of you is empty. You refers not to some permanent substance. It's simply a convenient way to refer to the myriad, ever-changing individual processes that collectively we call you. So this convention of you, typically what we're used to now is something that can be defined. It's definable. It's based off of experience, of past experiences and judgments of what typically we believe to be ourselves. So throughout our lives we form judgments of what we believe to be ourselves, like, oh, I like piano. I want to explore the world, and those are the things that drive me. Those are some permanence I have underneath myself, something close to the soul. So things like that. But I just don't understand, because honestly, in my last videos, I've been trying to combine these concepts of like identity together to try to create something that eliminates insecurity and comparison as much as possible. And so I did take from Buddhism, but I do not think I directly presented this concept of the Anātman, because I do believe in this permanence of the self or soul. Consider a heap of sand. I liked this metaphor last time. Consider a heap of sand. The word heap is simply a convenient way to refer to the fact that there are thousands of individual grains of sand stacked on top of one another. Take the individual grains of sand away and nothing remains. The heap was just a shorthand way of saying thousands of individual grains of sand stacked on top of each other. And I feel like this is alluding to the concept of time, that we are not actually one singular definable thing, essence, but instead a continuous line of things over and over. So it's almost like every iteration of ourselves, every second in time, millisecond in time, we are technically a different version of self. And so the self cannot be defined simply by saying that all of these collections of grains of sand of milliseconds in time is not the self, is not you, but is instead the collection of, is not the collection of, but is something different entirely. So we're not heaps of sand, we are the individual grains. I don't know. I hope I explained that well. So it is with the self, the Buddha thinks. We use individual names and pronouns like I, you, he, she, they, and we may think that in using such words, we are referring to individual, persisting entities. But people are not individual, persisting entities. We are composite, ever-changing entities. Composite. I honestly don't know what composite means in this context. I mean, we've already said ever-changing. I feel like that word is repeated so often. Please. I need it to be connected to something else so that I can understand it better in the context. Composite definition. Made up of distinct components. Made by combining two or more existing things, having factors, okay, made up of of distinct components. What I'm essentially trying to do is just gather a gather a good list of characteristics for what this Buddhist theory of identity is, the no self. And if we just have a concrete list of characteristics, then we can have an easier way of understanding it. And, you know, I think inherently it's supposed to be not understood well, but we'll try. A famous Buddhist text that illustrates the thinking is the Questions of King Matilda. Let's read it. Okay. Is it the pole that is the chariot? I did not say that. Is it the axle that is the chariot? Certainly not. Is it the wheels or the framework or the ropes or the yoke or the spokes of the wheels or the goad that are the chariot? And to all these he still answered no. Then is it all these parts of it that are the chariot? No, sir. But is there anything outside from that is the chariot? And still he answered no. Then thus ask I as I may, I can discover no chariot. Chariot is mere empty sound. So here, for like a substitute for like the pole and the axle, it would be like, well, is myself this love for piano and traveling? Is myself actually my external characteristics, blonde hair and things like that? Is myself actually something closer to the soul? Is it some characteristics that cannot be defined, like natural inclinations? No. And then anything outside, I think that's referring to like something like tribal beliefs where there's like, I forgot. I don't know. I'm not going to explain something that I don't completely understand. Like, then, therefore, I can discover no chariot. Chariot is a mere empty sound. And it's like, okay, but what is the empty sound? I guess perhaps if this chariot is really a mere empty sound, then the question is not what is the chariot, but how does one operate believing that the chariot is an empty sound, or that the self is nothing. I think now we cannot make characteristics. Now I fear we have been asking the wrong question. No, but I'm still trying to understand this. Like a chariot, the self is simply a convenient fiction, a shorthand reference for the many parts that make us up. Its existence is based in convention, rather than in some ultimate persisting material of reality. So, people exist in a conventional sense. We just aren't what we think we are in an ultimate sense. Okay. So, ultimately being like, oh, my natural inclinations, soul, divine, is not an accurate definition of the self in the Buddhist view. When we refer to individuals, we are actually referring to great masses of interacting processes. Okay, it's a characteristic. We are actually referring to great masses of interacting processes. So is the self more so functional? Processes, masses of interacting processes. Alright. Bounded within particular body parts. Interacting processes such as thoughts, emotions, digestion, even bounded by particular body parts. I'm pretty sure that's what it means. Processes equals thoughts. I hope you can see this well. I think it's not bad. I know I can use Notion or something, a note taker, whatever, but I really want to use pen and paper. Thoughts, emotions, digestion, interactions, like talking, perhaps. Oh, interacting processes. interactions with others. Compassion. I know compassion is a big thing. In Buddhism, it's like a fundamental operating principle, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm gonna reach out. So, should I? Oh my goodness, someone's actually in Twitch stream. Hello, it's B-OK. Hello. Okay, anyway. The ship of Theseus. Yeah, I forgot what that ship was called last stream, but I was like, the ship, the one with the philosophy ship. The ship of Theseus is a thought experiment where you have a ship and maybe it needs a repair one day, so you take out that part that was not good and you replace it with a better part. But eventually, every part becomes broken, so you need to replace the ship entirely over time. So is it still the ship of Theseus that it originally was? And it's just like, the point of it is to ask what makes up our identity, and I guess the Buddhist answer here is that none of these things make up our identity, so the identity is actually empty. The identity does not exist in the ultimate sense. Okay, you'll learn much more by reading the Gita or Buddha's work. Okay, hold on. Sounds like there's a specific focus on the combination and interaction. Oh my god, you can see my message. No, you can't see my message. Sounds like there is specific focus on the combination and interaction being the important factor, as opposed to simply individual attributes that we may contain or display. Yeah, so it seems more action-focused, interaction-focused. Very true. Yes, digestion. The gut is the second brain and you are what you eat. Yeah. Alright. Wait, hold on. Alright, it was my dad. Okay. No, oh my god. Stop, it's not a freaking insurance company. If I don't have a number saved in my phone, I never answer it. Okay. In fact, much like the subatomic scientific picture of the world, Buddhists think that at root, everything is simply made of individual pieces of dharma, like atoms, but with a minuscule time element too. Tiny slices of the cosmos in real time configured in different ways. There's a vast I swear, like, I read that sentence before. There's a vast Buddhist literature that categorizes these slivers of happenings, dharma, to describe exactly how they make us up and everything we interact with. The crucial Buddhist insight is that the sum of these tiny slices of the cosmos is not greater than its parts. You are nothing more than a composite of the changing thoughts, desires, processes, and atoms that temporarily make you up. Desires, there we go. Nice little list for us. Desires. And atoms. Atoms moving. Well, then, I mean, the question becomes in, like, well, then how does... let's see, I'll leave some space. How... So, if the self cannot be defined accurately and is quite literally nothing that has permanence, then how does one operate in the world? You must have memories, you must have perception, you must have experience. How does one operate? And I assume we're gonna get into like some concept of detachment, at least towards self-definitions. Let's see. There you go. Okay. You do not experience your perceptions and feelings. You are your perceptions and feelings. So all experiences are I don't know if I should have started like that. Are not external to you. External to you, but integrated. But integrated. You are your perceptions and feelings. I feel like that's not a healthy view I've had in the past. Because then, I mean, if I believe I am my perceptions and feelings, then the feelings kind of just get really identified with. I start identifying with my emotions, like, oh, I am sad right now. I'm not allowed to feel any other way, and that kind of makes me uncomfortable to step out of that. So, unless I'm misinterpreting that one sentence title, which I probably am, the Buddha says all this not to belittle us, but to point out a trick we play on ourselves, a trick that entrenches a flawed view of reality, and so causes suffering. For even if we concede we are always physically changing, we might still quietly cling to a mental version of the continuous persisting self. We might think of this mental self as some kind of pilot of our actions, or the keeper of our internal monologues. And this internal monologue can be very convincing in making us think it's some kind of persisting entity. I think, therefore I am, alright? But the Buddha's insight is that this persisting mental self emerges only when we are thinking. It is a verb, not a noun. Just as dancing doesn't exist when one isn't dancing, so the self only exists when one is thinking or feeling. Okay, I probably did misinterpret that then, because here, how does one operate? There's a focus on actions and processes rather than who is committing those processes. Then who is committing those actions. All right. Okay. This point was famously articulated in the Western tradition of philosophy too by the 18th century thinker David Hume. Reflecting on his own stream of consciousness, Hume writes, "For my part, when I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception or other of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. I never can catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception." Okay, so how does one operate? Focused on perceptions and experience rather than experience rather than a persisting concept of the self. And in my experience, doing this has been great for me psychologically, mentally, emotionally, because I feel like constantly evaluating this self, trying to define it, is kind of a waste of time. I found that the more I focus on experiencing but also doing things that I really want to do, and the less time I focus on the fact that I am committing them, the more present I feel when doing those actions. And I think that's what they're kind of getting at, and I kind of love that. I think that could be very useful in the concept of like in the context of psychology and therapy. Interesting. Okay. In other words, we find when dwelling on ourselves is a bundle of thoughts and perceptions, we can never use I unless it's attached to a corresponding am, want, think, feel. I kind of like that sentence. Okay. We can never use... I feel like I do. It's fine. I do hold my pen weird. I, unless it's attached to a corresponding verb. No, I'll put the am. Am, want, think, feel. So originally I thought they were saying one should identify with their emotions and experiences and cling to them, but that is not what they were saying at all, obviously, because Buddhism is not for self-grasping or any form of self-identification, because here the self does not exist in the ultimate sense. Okay. So, okay. Now what I'm trying to find is just an operation of this belief. If one were to apply this concept of the no self perfectly, how would that look like? What effects would it have? That's what I'm looking for now. So, you are simply awareness. Yes, the upshot is that while thoughts and feelings exist, there is no separate I, no separate self experiencing those thoughts and feelings. The person simply is those ever-changing thoughts and feelings. You are sadness 1 minute, happiness the next. I like that entire paragraph. That really freaking explains everything well. Hugh goes on to conclude that people are thus nothing but a bundle or collection of different perceptions which succeed each other with an inconceivable rapidity and are in perpetual flux and movement. Maybe I should research this Hume guy. I have never read any of his stuff, but he sounds pretty interesting. Though it's supposed Hume came to these views entirely independently, recent research suggests, alright, may have been influenced by Buddhists. Though we attempt to impose continuous narrative, okay, so not attempting, not imposing continuous narrative. I just wonder, in the case of language, could one say, if they applied this view ideally, yesterday I ate, Or would they simply be so focused on experiencing the now that looking upon the past is kind of useless? I'm really trying to focus on the concrete application and what this looks like in effect, because I'm particularly interested in like how this could be used to psychologically or mentally or emotionally help someone. The key point is this. Okay, you can't apply this. Why? Oh my gosh, am I going at this like all wrong? What makes us continuous with the people we were 10 years ago then is not some fixed self, but a particular chain of causes and effects. We mistake our imperfect, ever-shifting memories of this chain for substance, and the convention of self emerges. Okay. What I mean by apply is that, like, well, how would it look like if somebody believed this? Because if this is your fundamental operating belief, then it would change all of your actions that like come after that. Like what would that person look like? But yeah, isn't the point of Buddhism being a Buddhist monk eventually to understand these beliefs so well that they are expressed throughout your life, throughout your being? I thought that was it, no? I mean, you should read the Red Book by Carl Jung. Oh my gosh, so many people have been telling me that. I'm reading Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung right now, but because I don't have access to like the Red Book right now. I don't have it. I feel like you would simply be accepting of the events. That's what I mean, like, how does this work day to day? What does one think of day to day when applying this fundamental understanding of the self? I thought I understood in that it was simply going to be a focus on actions and processes rather than constantly self-evaluating, focusing on the self, focusing on a continuous narrative. And I thought that was incredibly helpful on its own for me mentally. Like, no longer defining myself as successful or not, or defining myself like this is my passion and I am valuable if I am chasing toward it, and I'm not valuable if I am not chasing toward it. I think that like the concreteness of defining myself and not doing that anymore really helped. That was what my last video was about. Why is the self harmful? Well, that's a completely different question that I was... Let me see. Okay. Non-attachment. You can't do it as an ego. It happens when you transcend the individual ego, which would be enlightened. What does transcend the individual ego mean? I mean, so like transcending into the collective ego. But you see, collective ego of everyone. I can perhaps. Okay. Why is the self harmful? In response to this analysis, we might think, well, what's the harm? Even if the self is nothing more than the sum of its swirling parts, an incredibly complicated web of cause and effect, isn't it just easier to say, I am tired, rather than something like, the current emergent feeling from thousands of ever-changing processes is tiredness? That's exactly what I was asking, like, just day to day. Some Buddhists might to an extent agree referring to a self can occasionally be convenience. But there's a great deal of literature discussing this point, and it should be noted that there are some Buddhist schools that would disagree with the idea that referring to a self is ever productive. I mean, if we follow... I think, honestly, you can say I am tired for the convenience, but you don't actually feel the underlying meaning of I am tired and the concept of like defining the self as I think you could just use it for convenience, but like kind of have a cognitive dissonance toward the phrase or interpret the phrase differently. But yeah. If we follow the Buddha's original teachings as recorded by the suttas in the Pali Canon, however, we might say there's relatively little harm in using the convention of self as shorthand for the thousands of interacting parts that make you up, especially if it helps improve those parts in ways that lessen suffering. I will eat more healthily benefits a significant number of parts, for example. But I mean... and here all Buddhist schools would agree, we must remember that the utility of this fictional, conventional self is limited, and actually becomes very detrimental very quickly if we take it too far. Okay. Let's... Why? Self is dangerous. Okay, I'm trying to look for what parts are dangerous and why, and then how you can just not implement those parts that are dangerous into your mind and kind of create an alternative of thinking to them. I know I'm really focused on like the practical manner of this philosophy, which is not the point of Buddhism at all, but that's what I really care about at the end of the day. How do you think this affects interpersonal relationships? You see, like, that's a good question. That's a question I want to answer. Like how to connect with people if you view them as also not the same entity through time, but simply their own present experience. If the previous commenter was referring to the collective ego and saying that Buddhism does promote transcending to the collective ego, you would, in interpersonal relationships, believe that you are the same entity, actually. And so, I don't know how that would work practically at all. How do you think this affects, like, how to connect with people if you view them as also not the same entity? I have no idea. Practical tools is the point. I hope it's the point. Because, I mean, there's, like, small ideas in here that I really like, such as not defining the self so concretely. Like, I think that's just kind of useless. It should never be a focus. And so it's like, that's a cool tool. If we start believing the self is actually real, some kind of independent, persisting substance as opposed to a convenient fiction, the danger is that it encourages us to view everything through its lens. So that's the bad part, is viewing everything through its lens. Viewing everything through the lens of the ego, essentially. Through the ego. And I imagine this is like largely subconscious. So this is like a subconscious belief. It's like subconscious operating, that the thing I am experiencing right now, I am experiencing it through it, with all of my past experiences influencing what I am experiencing. That's the lens of the ego and the past self. Okay. Subconscious. Much to consider here for real. I know, because it's so unintuitive, you know. Especially with how language works. Like, I am writing. Not possible. Subconscious attachment meant to continuous narrative. A continuous narrative affecting your perception, there's a word I'm looking for. Your interpretation of every external event. Subconscious attachment to a continuous narrative affecting your interpretation of every external event. So like subconsciously, I'm going to be reading this as if I am a self with lots of experiences and preferences, such as I like psychology and I want to focus on a certain type of information here and extract the things that I want. And so this is affecting my interpretation of the words I am reading right now. But Buddhism is saying, maybe we should actually interpret reality as it is, as it is as a whole, without affecting things through the lens of the self? Or is it like what? It encourages to view everything through its lens. But is there a point in which viewing the world through the lens of this concept of the self, of you, of a continuous narrative is okay? Because, I would think so. For real, just randomly helped it. Hello. I don't meditate right now. I used to, though. We feel so intimately connected to this self that it becomes the most important thing in the universe. I don't know about that. I think it's an overstep. I don't think you need to. Technically, because I guess what they're saying is that if the self dies, then I die, and then you're very attached to it, maybe? Okay. We then judge reality only by how it impacts this fictional self, which leads us to develop certain attachments and aversions, such as my aversion to some of this information because I feel like it's not practical and useful in real life. And helping mental frameworks. Oh my god. No, but this is very true. What they're speaking is just facts. Like, I like this and I don't like that. I want more of this and less of that. I love this and require it to be content. I hate this, and whenever it happens, I am filled with dread and misery. But the question is, like, why is this? I can understand how it can be bad, but is it bad in every single scenario? I'm not convinced yet, bro. You have to convince me. We become enslaved by the fictional self, by the demands of the ever-changing internal monologue. Enslaved as in controlled. The self controls the self. The self, like our typical notion of I, controls interpretations, therefore you are a slave to it. That is what they're alluding to. That is interesting. You are a slave to it. Okay. I can see that. Like a black hole bending space-time to trap light, the illusion of self warps reality and traps our thoughts, feelings, and experiences in ego. I see. And as the world is fundamentally transient and rarely accords with the hopes and desires we place on it, bad things happen, and good things always end. As long as we continue to view reality through the lens of illusory ego, as long as we continue to grasp for things we imagine this self wants, as long as we use flawed mental models as crutches and misunderstand what we really are, we set ourselves up for perpetual suffering. Okay, alright. So what causes the perpetual suffering is attachment to... maybe I will use Notion because I can't write fast enough. Perpetual suffering. It is the attachment to ideals. Really? I mean, yes, technically. Attachment to ideals / hated things in our environment, and attachment to concrete judgments of ourselves in relation to our environments. But can we, after reading this section of what actually causes suffering, I mean, can we just take these negatives away, but still conveniently refer to ourselves as I? My camera's gonna die. Hold on. Understanding conceptually won't really help you. Oh wait, that wasn't your first message. Hold on. Alright. Yes, I was gonna read what you sent. The realization that the ego is an illusion is not something that you can understand with the mind. You have to experience the discovery for yourself with practical methods. Understanding conceptually won't really help you. But isn't understanding conceptually the first step? Because I understand that, if you don't understand conceptually first, then you don't know what first step to take after that for experiencing. Okay. Oh yeah. What causes perpetual suffering? Attachment to our ideals that we perceive as our ideals, or hated things, and concrete judgment of ourselves in relation to our environment. But yeah, my question is, what if you just don't have concrete judgments of yourself? Then how would you operate? It'd be something like, I guess I don't really know how you would operate, because there would be no focus on what you value, because you don't have a concrete judgment of what you actually value. You are just constantly experiencing, but how does one even operate throughout life? How does one have a job? how do you have a job? How do you make money? How do you care about, some things? Okay. The dangers of identity. Another harm that comes from viewing the self as a real, independent substance is that it encourages us to attribute certain qualities to it. This is very real. Very real. In other words, we start to cling to certain identities. We become attached to certain ways of thinking about ourselves, both positive and negative, and this leads to real suffering. This is similar to Carl Jung's concept of the persona. This identity here that we're, concretely defining would be something similar to Carl Jung's persona, and he also talked about the fact that over-identification is harmful, because if you start over-identifying with qualities or characteristics, then you simply cannot step out of them without feeling self-judgment, and it limits expansion of the self. Okay. Identity defining. But I really think this is the main problem. Identity defining. I think if that were taken away, half of mental and emotional problems are no longer have weight. They're much easier to let go of. And this is the portion of Buddhism I understand now that I was really interested in. This detachment of identity in particular. Okay, but not necessarily the rest. But I still think it's interesting, and I'm still confused about it. Okay. Consider, I am a failure. What does this mean? What parts of you have failed? The hairs on your skin, your digestive system, your ability to count? Or consider, I am a pessimist. Don't you experience a mix of hopeful thoughts too? Is your laughter pessimistic? What box in your boundless composite existence by selecting only the pessimistic thoughts that bubble up, declaring those to be a true reflection of some persistent self, and ignoring the great reality and flux of existence? This is what I really like. This was perfectly stated as well. I really like those examples. Identity defining, failure, pessimist, by what concrete, never-changing metric? On the other hand, I don't know if they're about to get into this. They might. Yeah, positive views. I was also going to say, positive views of self can be just as sinister. Buddhists draw on a powerful image here. Imagine a knife smeared with honey. Initially, the knife tastes sweet, but it will soon cause you serious damage. Just because even if you view yourself in a positive light, that introduces the potential to view yourself in a negative light if you are no longer following or adopting those qualities that you considered positive. And, this is what I liked. So it is with a positive sense of identity, the Buddha argues. We might find real pleasure and happiness from it in the short term. I am an athlete. I am a top-tier lawyer. And what I find really interesting about this is that in books like Atomic Habits and a lot of self-help books or whatever, they promote the idea of identifying with a certain positive outcome, like I am an athlete, I am a top-tier lawyer. And what this is supposed to do is supposed to attach your identity with certain habits, certain actions, and it's supposed to make more sense for your brain to be motivated to do those things. Because if you define yourself as an athlete, you're more likely to actually go to the gym, because that is now your identity. But I do believe this is very harmful, because then what do? If you are an athlete and that is what you have been identifying yourself as, what happens if you get hurt? Are you done? your identity collapses. You can no longer hold that view of yourself that you are an athlete, because you can no longer be one. And then it creates like all of these problems of like negative self-image. And I just really like this. Buddhism aims to fix our conceptions about identity not by showing us the correct identity. Really? I thought that the whole thing was about correct identity perception. But by claiming that we do not have an identity at all. Oh, well, correct identity in the sense that there is like a positive identity to be striving for. That makes sense. You cope, that's what you do if everything you believed yourself to be is taken away from you. Yes, exactly. Well, and then coping is also bad. Because the striving toward that one identity is still there. And that striving is what leads to dissatisfaction in the self. That is what this is basically saying. Our recurrent thoughts, feelings, hopes, fears, desires, moods, obsessions, attachments, none of them define us, for nothing does. You see, this is where like I have issue, because I just don't understand how somebody could live like that in a normal world. And I feel like, sometimes philosophy is like just, I'm not sure, our recurrent thoughts, feelings, hopes, desires, moods, obsessions, attachment, none of them define us, for nothing does. Okay, well, define us, actually. Makes sense. Recurrent thoughts do not define you because they probably aren't recurrent throughout your entire life. You didn't have those recurrent thoughts when you were a child, and so the child and the self you are right now are technically the same self. Feelings do not define you because they're constantly changing. Hopes, same thing. Fears, same thing. Desires, same thing. Yeah, I think the underlying is just the constant change. Alright. When in a transient composite world, we see ourselves for what we really are, ever-changing bundles of the same. We recognize that all identity is fallacy, unbox ourselves from illusions of self, and flow with the swirl. By releasing ourselves from the distorting gravity of self, we see that we are just like everything else, and not more important than anything else. Everything in reality becomes our concern, not just the illusory self, small, warped part of it. I guess in just integrating this belief of no longer defining the self does in a way make you more objective, in that it stops you from being so biased from the perception of the ego, not the illusory self's small warped part of it, because the ego inherently makes you biased by focusing on certain parts of reality. Okay. Ego / concept of static self, so like the traditional view on identity. So inherently makes you biased, as the static self holds opinions. Can you see it? Yeah, you can. Holds opinions, beliefs, etc. etc. Making you focus on certain interpretations of reality I mean, I just think perhaps a because I mean the main problem is the attachment to the beliefs, attachment to opinions that you hold. So what happens if you detach from them and keep yourself, I hate this word, but open-minded, and that you are responsive to other interpretations constantly, then in that case, I feel like that could potentially be how an ideal version of identity could look like. You know, so the problem equals attachment slash clinging to certain interpretations and so when you no longer are clinging to certain interpretations, you can kind of take a step back, view other things, so that you are less biased. That's the trajectory we're hoping for. Step back. Okay. Are you a philosophy major, or is philosophy just a major interest you have? Major interest I have. I'm not a philosophy major. I was actually a computer science major, so this is like really off. I've come to the conclusion, alright. You won't be able to understand until you raise your consciousness. This information will be confusing until you get to a higher state. You know, probably. I don't know. Probably, bro. I just recorded a video before this, so my throat is like extra dry. I also like kind of talk to myself like all day. So can I say that? If in this ideal form of identity, can I say that I talk to myself all day, generally speaking? Just to include that little identifier there. You know, I'm not doing it all the time. I didn't do it when I was a child. Like, I don't... Could I say? Probably not. Probably not. From the previous examples, definitely not. How can we apply... What a beautiful section I see right here. Oh my god. Well, first of all, I think that entire last section on identity is very much applicable. Maybe I should shout myself out because I actually made a Substack article about this, and maybe we should just read my own Substack article. Okay. How can we apply Anātman to everyday life? Applying. Such a beautiful section. I actually have not done my homework, and I was supposed to write in the margins so that I could make more connections with the last video, but I like didn't. Applying Anātman. I also didn't research how to say that. Hopefully I'm saying it right. To every day. Also, how long is this? Oh, we're like about... We're actually almost there. Interesting. Oh! It's the second last section. And then I guess I'll yap about my Substack article. Into everyday life. Okay. Can you... Maybe I should bring the lamp over here. I don't have space. Or I can just turn the lights on. Hold on. The Buddhist picture of reality is very far from our everyday view of the world. Everything is impermanent, everything is composite, and the self does not really exist. When going about our days, we probably don't have these truths at the forefront of our minds. We might agree with them in quiet moments of reflection, but if we're eating cereal or thanking a colleague, we're probably not thinking. Life is transient, and the self is an illusion. Instead, we are commuting or out with our friends, viewing the world through the lens of self. Desire and attachment may come back and play a central role. So how practical is the Buddhist teaching of no self for eradicating suffering really? How can it help us deal with stress at work, frustration with politics, difficult relationships? The Buddhist scholar suggests, I should probably say his name. The Buddhist scholar Nicholas Bomarito suggests in his book, Seeing Clearly, that one way Buddhism can play a role here is in helping us recognize everyday life not as fake or unimportant, but as a convention, a form of living governed by certain rules and restrictions that we participate in, but the fate of which we aren't wholly attached to. That seems very, very similar to Stoicism. Anyway, I have heard the phrase, Stoicism is just watered down Buddhism. I'm seeing it now. But it's a convention. So, I'm just playing the rules of the game right now. That does not, I don't know. I don't think I understand. A form of everyday life. Oh. Living. I mean, doesn't everybody just see that? Just well, not everybody, but I know a lot of people that kind of just see the world that way. Oh yeah, I'm participating in this social structure right now, but I'm aware that, I don't really care about it. I do that for my videos. I'm participating in the social structure of, being beautiful, because honestly, I think it'll increase viewer retention. And so it's that doesn't mean that I find myself more valuable if I have higher viewer retention or if I am more beautiful, but I'm participating in the social structure because I understand the effects. So, don't people just do that? Limit governed by certain rules and restrictions we participate in, but the fate of which we aren't wholly attracted to. Okay, but can we make exceptions? Yeah, fine, I won't care if my coffee spills on the floor, I don't care. But can I care if I go through a breakup because I really cared about them? Can't I feel sadness in that scenario? I think in cases like that, in grieving, I mean, I am attached to those scenarios. Can I be aware that I'm attached to those scenarios and I'm choosing the potential of suffering? I would rather suffer than not be attached to other people and caring about their presence. And that's my main question, which we aren't wholly attracted to. I really would rather suffer. Attracted. I put attracted instead of attached. The heck? I might just have to switch to Notion. It looks so bad, kind of. Maybe I could make it bigger. Oh, no, I can't. No, go back. So we can view the world through the lens of self for convenience at work and in society. I do like doing that, though. Okay, anyway. But we don't need to get too attached to that lens. For example, if you were playing a board game with friends and family, the chances are you wouldn't attach your entire emotional well-being to whether or not you win. We could look at our conventional everyday lives in the same way. We play particular roles in them, but fundamentally we recognize that convention is not reality. That stakes just aren't that high, for our emotional lives are governed by the truths of reality, impermanence and no self, not by whether or not we get this promotion or win that award. Exactly. Understanding as Bon Mariato puts it, understanding that it's just a game doesn't mean you stop playing altogether. Instead, the significance of the game changes. Winning is still nice, but when you keep your sense of what the game really is, it doesn't affect you in the same way. I don't get that, because wouldn't winning not affect you at all if you were attached? Because there is no nice, there is no bad. Winning is still nice, but when you keep your sense of what the game really is, it doesn't affect you in the same way. You get a kind of peace of mind, one that's different from the simple joy of winning, because you relate to the game for what it really is. You know, in the way I see it, if there is no wrong, there is no attachment to losing, then winning shouldn't be nice. You get a peace of mind, one that's different from simple joy of winning, because you relate to the game for what it really is. But that's what I mean. I feel like, if winning is going to have value to you, then you are inherently still valuing something, and that value is directed by a self. In another example, Bon Mariato asks us to consider being in a museum, but self-conscious about what we look like. Here you are in a building full of wonderful art, and you can't really enjoy it because you're too wrapped up in your self-image. By being too wrapped up by your idea of self, you disengage from the world and miss out on valuable experiences. Very true. The solution, Bon Mariato reminds us, is to recall reality and thereby deflate the self. That's what I like, practically. Focusing on external experiences and also being aware of social conventions are both two great things. I actually do think reading my Substack article will be helpful, and it's not just a troll thing, because I do talk about these things, and I kind of put them in a plain manner. Understanding, not just intellectually, but viscerally, that you are a composite, relational, and impermanent thing can help to dissolve these barriers and allow you to more fully engage with the world. Exactly, especially because you are not as biased anymore, because you are no longer defining self in certain ways. So you're kind of heading towards that direction of not attaching yourself to certain experiences being perceived in a certain way, not attaching yourself to a certain I just wrote it down. Certain interpretation, not attaching your identity to a certain interpretation, so then that opens up new opportunities to see the world in a different way, and it's very externally focused, and I kind of like that, but the external focus has to still be governed by some sort of value. That's why I don't understand the no self practically. Like, I don't know. Perhaps there's like moments that you can experience it, such as in meditation, as somebody said before. But this, living according to transient identity, status, and attachment will only bring you dissatisfaction 100%. You are making the choice to value these things and to attach them to your identity and self-worth, and that brings you dissatisfaction. The Buddha says, being over-minded Being ever mindful of the flow will bring peace. That is true. If you are sad, that doesn't mean you will be sad forever. You don't have to be so attached to this interpretation that you will be sad forever, and instead focus on the fact that you may be sad right now, but what does that sadness signify? It signifies that you value something. That is the reason you are sad. And you look at the value and you say, I really value this thing. Perhaps I should act in alignment with that value. What can I do right now, despite being sad, that is in alignment with that value? And so sadness kind of becomes empowering. I talk about this in my freaking Substack article that I actually think was kind of good now, after like a month of writing it. Okay, but this is the central value. But this is what I'm saying, that I don't understand how you can have a central value without a self. But then I guess compassion. Not gonna lie, all facts be okay. I'm sorry. I have to keep you on your toes. Central compassion. Oh my god. Thank you. You're welcome. Oh, okay. Beyond the lessening of personal suffering, perhaps the most important practical outcome that comes from deflating the self is the room it creates for compassion. So that's like the central focus, it's the central value. Obviously, that was just the freaking title. I don't know why I reiterated that. I just got excited. By moving the grasping, reality warping self out of the way, we better recognize that though we may be trapped in dukkha, so is everybody else we know. Exactly. The existence of every sentient being is characterized... Thank you for subbing. The existence of every sentient being is characterized by suffering for exactly the same reason ours is. We live transient lives of ignorance and pain. In encouraging detachment from self, then Buddhism does not look away from reality. It's not here to free us from the world. It's here to free us for the world. Wait, I need to read that again. Buddhism does not look away from reality. It's not here to free us from the world. It's here to free us for the world. I'll write that down. What a nice little phrase. Free us from, essentially using escapism, using Buddhism as an escape. To relieve you of suffering is not the intention at all. The intention is instead to detach so that you can bring back the energy, the positive intentions into the world. You know, that's so important, because that's the original intention. Free us from? No. Free us for compassion. Yes. Okay. Honing selflessness through Buddhist practice. Put grasping ego to one side. Open ourselves to reality and cultivate love and compassion for all living beings. That's what I love about Buddhism, because it does do that. If you are trying to not have a grasping ego, it literally helps you in wanting to be compassionate. Alright. Learn more about Buddhist philosophy. Okay. And of course, from more modern sources, The Subtle Art of Not Giving. Oh, really? I didn't know it talked about Buddhism. I've heard of that book, though. Okay. I'm gonna... Substack... Posts. This is a ad for my Substack. Thanks. All right. Our current views on identity. I think we're just gonna read this for like funsies. Okay. Identity, roughly defined, is a collection of characteristics a person has associated with with the concept of their self or ego. I am quiet, a night owl, an introvert. These types of characteristics make up our identity. Identity in this sense serves as a tool to separate your being from everyone else. No one else has my exact identity. It's something to be proud of, something to anchor to in times of low self-worth, and define what exactly is valuable about you. Here is something I can point to. I am a complex artist in a world who wouldn't understand. Our characteristics are a feast for our ego to indulge in when comparing ourselves to others. Identity is naturally created in human cognition, stemming from the need to categorize and understand their environment, both external and internal. We create language to describe this phenomena. To understand yourself is to know these characteristics and lean into them. To be yourself, losing yourself is the process of stepping away from desired traits, or not knowing what your desired traits are. Let me click out of this. However, this view makes your identity static, while expanding your shackles to one state of being, oftentimes unknowingly and subconsciously. When defining these characteristics, they inadvertently become expectations you need to live up to. Even when people try stepping out of the previous identities they've established deliberately, they have trouble feeling like a fraud, studying in a coffee shop, for example. In modern self-improvement spaces, and I think I used this word wrong, and books such as Atomic Habits, it's suggested that anchoring your desired habits to your desired identity will make you more consistent in implementing them. Although this is verifiably and intuitively true, it brushes over the inevitable downfalls of identifying with desired characteristics. Because how do you feel about yourself when you don't live up to those desired characteristics? How do you feel when others criticize your choices or views? You become defensive. How do you feel when your dreams fall apart due to external circumstances? You experience an identity collapse. These are all holes in identifying with your desired characteristics, leading to insecurity, emotional reactivity, defensiveness, ignorance, and even even existential anxiety. My proposed view of identity addresses these gaps in a practical way. Facts! I'll see that. I'm one of these 16 types. No, literally. I know MBTI is bad. That's why I don't like it now. I was very obsessed with it 2 years ago, though. My proposed view. Instead, I ask, why identify with these characteristics at all? I have to tell you, when I was freaking writing this, I didn't know about Buddhism. I came into this blind. I was like, this is what I don't like. And then I learned about Buddhism, and then I could complete the article, because I had been working on this for like months, and I was like, I'm missing something. And I learned about Buddhism, and then I kind of filled in the gaps. But this I didn't know about anything. Our current definition of identity has been socially constructed without considering a potentially better ideal, bringing about common human struggles such as stepping out of past patterns. This is your static identity limiting the expansion of the self, being inconsolable after an event that should have been a slight bump in the road, emotional reactivity, and also identifying with your current states. Identifying with your current states and your current interpretations of reality. Being adamant to prove ideas you hold, denying good arguments in the process, essentially being closed-minded. So because you are inherently biased from your ego, you're not going to be open to, good arguments. Because you may hold a view because it soothes your ego. It is a coping mechanism in a way. And so Today, I propose a view based in its utility for a psychologically efficient life, for someone who strives to master their actions and intentions by understanding their mind and influences. Never identify. Not only do we identify with characteristics to relate with the world, but we also identify with perspectives and beliefs. I feel angry, and only X scenario will make me feel better. In this sense, identification requires a tethering to the self and leads to an incapacity to see opposing or even parallel paths of thought. You are limiting yourself by attaching to certain perspectives and ideals because you're not even looking at other paths that you could be taking, mentally speaking. Emotional situations are the best example. I'm so glad I freaking included an example. I'm so good. To illustrate how the old view of identity makes us miss crucial perspectives in our environment, let's observe sadness and anger. I find every time I am sad, I could instead be angry. Sadness means I'm upset that a situation is happening to me, but anger means I'm upset a situation is happening to me. These slight shifts in perspective are what ideally one should be aware of. Ideally, one should be aware of every single path you can take emotionally so that you can choose one rationally based in some form of value, based in some value. And you could also act in accordance with that. That's what I love. Oh my god, you're like spamming chat. My dad's calling me again. Okay. The entire motive of never identifying, or rather shifting the definition as I will expand on, is to try to see every path of perspective clearly, while rationally choosing which to walk on through means of aligning with an underlying value. In this ideal, sadness almost becomes a form of empowerment, as it's a choice you've made in alignment with some underlying value and level of importance. But of course, you'll still be sad. No longer will you be primal, reacting to your environment based on your first instinct. You'll see different paths of perspective. Thank you for subscribing, Lisa. Focusing on the actual situation instead of how your identity is tied to it. Although this may sound like an absurd concept, you have probably integrated some form of this without knowing. Emotional regulation requires that we sometimes shift our perspective in more appropriate ways, actively choosing which story to tell ourselves. Overwhelm becomes ambition when you believe it'll work out in the end. Defeat becomes a new beginning when you search for alternative paths. That's emotional regulation, just changing your perspective. So ideally one would be able to see all of the options of perspective, and detaching from certain interpretations will help you in doing that and being more objective in seeing mental paths that you can take. When would one choose sadness over happiness, though? Anger over satisfaction? When they rationally align with some important value. For an abused wife, anger, as opposed to passivity, is empowering. For an abused child, sadness, as opposed to numbness, is a sign of life. For a grieving widow, sadness, as opposed to indifference, is a reflection of their love. Negative emotions definitely have the capacity to align with your ideal values, so it's important to not shun them completely. Ego-driven versus self-driven identity. Woo! I've been working on this freaking concept for so long. I think slight things may have shifted from this definition that I provided here, but I think it's mostly the same. When redefining identity, also this is my freaking article. So, I just made this up in my own research of like Carl Jung and Buddhism. But yeah, these are like my concepts that I made up. They are inspired by Buddhism and Carl Jung, but not completely, because I don't think this is very Buddhist at all, kind of. When redefining identity, there's lots of moving parts and wholes, but these two concepts fill them neatly. Ego-driven identity is a natural reaction to existence, and it's the most common view of identity we just addressed. So, what people usually think of for the self. To stabilize the self in an uncertain world, the ego fuses with characteristics and creates solid ideas of how one wants to relate with the world. For sake of having a mostly positive, concrete, continuous self-image, I would actually kind of remove positive there. It's true, but it's not very accurate. Okay, social belonging and concretely relating with the world means survival within the herd and predictability. That's why evolutionarily it developed. It's a way to know where you stand in society, even if inaccurate. Any definition feels safer than none. Any definition of the self, any understanding of the self, any conception of the self that you have, any conception of a certain perspective that you have. It feels safer for it to be defined rather than it to be in limbo. But I will be proposing an alternative right now. At first glance, this identity seems necessary, because without it one may ask, who am I? And what am I meant to do? Ego-driven identity gives an easy answer such as, I matter because I'm successful, intelligent, or beautiful. I'm meant to do XYZ because of who I am. Ego-driven identity is also constantly socially rewarded. We, as general society, praise or look up to those who are extremely confident, those who brand themselves with a consistent identity, especially in social media, and have external achievements. We look down on people who are ambiguous, uncertain, or are in between predefined states. Okay, but ego-driven identity leads to the following: contingent self-worth, needing, craving external praise, validation, and certainty of self-value. That is what the ego drives on, validation and needing external praise to kind of prove that your conception of yourself, that your definition of yourself as a good person or as a beautiful person, it needs validation in order to hold that conception of yourself up. Or else you're just gonna be delusional. The ego, to some extent, doesn't want to be delusional, and so that's why it seeks validation. It is delusional in some ways, though. This looks like being insecure about your appearance, or bragging about your appearance, believing it makes you better than others, or feeling you must prove your lifestyle or choices are right or good. Number 2, aversion, fear, or anger. This looks like being scared of stepping outside of your curated characteristics, or what being outside of your characteristics makes you. If you put on cat ears right now, and assuming you hate furries, would you hate yourself? This is what I'm alluding to. Who am I? Oh my god, wait, I'm not wearing them. Oh my god. Bro, I'm not being performative enough. Who am I if I'm not successful? Being angry when someone defines you outside of your preferred characteristics. If somebody called you a furry, would you be angry? Or judgment towards those who aren't your preferred characteristics. Do you hate furries? Very ego-driven of you. Just kidding. Oh my gosh, my tripod fell. No, but it's these harsh attachment to ideas that ideally one would try to step away from. because then it limits the expansion of the self. Not saying you're going to become a furry, but like at least you won't, just hate furries, and instead you'll treat them with compassion to some extent, but keep your children away from them because they're known to be groomers. So GG. Number 3, ignorance. Misreading reality as personal. An incorrect framing of perception, not a lack of information. Okay, this is what the ego-driven leads to, by the way. Yes. This looks like taking impersonal events and interpreting them as solid reflections of yourself. Since I've failed, I'm a failure. Or I'm inherently whatever, bad at whatever. When a situation happens, the mind immediately asks, what does this mean about me? Someone who doesn't text back makes you assume they hate you, instead of that they might be busy. You receive negative feedback and believe you are incompetent. Or you succeed and believe it means you're valuable. You may feel sad and believe something is wrong with you. It is the immediate question of like, what does this situation mean about me? Number 4, emotional reactivity. Self-protective, short-sighted rumination, identity fragility. Here, emotions feel absolute and personal. This is happening to me. I am distraught, rather than I am feeling XYZ, believing you must act in a certain way to correspond with your emotions. Again, it's like the rigid attachment to certain ideas. 5, distorted kindness. Yeah, your example should be better specifically in the who am I if I'm not example. It should be a lot clearer of what this means. Probably. Yeah, probably. I don't think I really thought about the examples that much. I was like, if it is an example, it probably works. Distorted kindness, transactional, selective, exhausting. Only caring because it reflects on how you're perceived by others, or because you will receive something valuable in return. This most commonly reflects in relationships where both are uncomfortable giving unless their efforts are reciprocated. This is just a really common thing, especially in modern relationships. It's kind of promoted. If he doesn't treat you well, and it's like, to an extent it's important, but I'll get into the alternative right now, where there's a balance. Number 6, existential anxiety. Perceived meaningless, resentment towards existence, clinging to roles, beliefs, and relationships to cope. You may feel pressure to become someone and feel like your life is wasted if you don't. If you don't conform to this static version of yourself that you have defined as a result of your environment and variety of influences, you fear stagnation, constantly trying to improve yourself from fear of falling behind and needing to maintain your identity. You may over-identify with being the smart, productive, creative one and fear being ordinary or replaceable. Again, all of these things are labels, characteristics, qualities that are attached to. Together, these create endless dissatisfaction, constant longing, reinforce repetitive life patterns, and similar emotional loops. Here is the alternative, the change in perspective. I think this was kind of yap. I'll still read it though. You actually aren't required to constantly defend yourself or your choices. You just think you are. In a world of constantly evolving standards and judgment, you place standards on yourself, and your ego identifies with characteristics in the effort to view yourself as competent, likable, and simply coherent. But you can choose to let go while still relating with your environment and prioritizing your values. That's the premise of this view. You don't have to second guess how you're perceived, constantly internally debating whether you have value or not, or constantly try to live up to something. Your mistakes don't have to threaten your curated identity, and you can be flexible and rational about your goals without losing yourself. Emotions can be felt without falling into them unhealthily by connecting external events to who you are. Losing your job, doesn't mean you're incompetent. Instead, every emotion can fuel an intention that develops into aligned action. The world isn't a stage. You don't have to perform for others. Instead, your identity can be driven by the self, something close to the soul. As you can see, this is where it very much does not relate with Buddhism, because the Buddhist belief does not really like the convention of the soul. The self is the who that experiences, allowing functioning in the world and relating with it. It retains memories, preferences, values, and agency. It's a necessary relational identity underneath ego, existing prior to ego. It's when identity is used as a tool, emotions are used as guides, and actions and thoughts are used to serve values. Here we go. The characteristics of a self-driven identity. Number 1, nothing becomes a final statement about who you are. No experience, no event. Whether you're succeeding or failing, it is irrelevant to who you are. You are not a success when succeeding or failure when failing. You are simply existing in a state of succeeding or failing by your own consciously developed standards. Failing, if that makes sense. You're simply existing in a state of succeeding or failing by your own consciously developed standards. For example, I may be quote-unquote failing if I'm not going to the gym as much as I want to, but that does not mean I am a failure. And failing means a restructuring of action and perhaps some inevitable disappointment. I may feel a bit sad, that I didn't live up to what I wanted, but that sadness is also not going to determine my future actions. And instead, to align with my value of going to the gym, the focus will be on a restructuring of action. Success means grateful happiness and energizing even more actions toward your perception of success, not pride. Because pride is obviously rooted in this concept of ego and comparison for others. So emotions are felt without self-definitions. This is an extension of the first characteristic, only applied to emotions. Being sad about a breakup doesn't mean you're broken or overly dependent. It just signifies a disappointment of someone you love leaving your company. Notice how the you here is the focus in the first example. You being broken, you being overly dependent. There is no definition after an emotion. And this really helps with emotional reactivity, aka I have lived experience. Thank you. It just signifies a disappointment of someone you love leaving your company. There is no judgment of the self, simply an acknowledgement of reality. Number 3, preferences exist independently of validation. Instead of asking, who should I be, you ask, what do I want to do? The focus is not on identity and how you're perceived by other people, but actions are based on preferences and values. When your preferences are constructed without others in mind, you can begin to build your own world, run by your own rules. This is what I see as ideal. You still care, deeply try, and love, but the outcomes of your efforts don't rationalize your actions or intentions. So the focus is always on the preference, not on the outcome of the action. I'm not doing YouTube to be rich. I'm doing YouTube, and specifically this, because I really freaking like it. Every action is done without need for reciprocation or a positive effect. Motivation to act exists only in preferences and values rather than the need for a specific external outcome. External outcomes are relevant, but not identity defining. Very good line there, because that's the balance. They're relevant. If I make money on YouTube, it's relevant, but I kind of see it more as like a signifier to am I actually doing a good job? Am I actually helping people out there? Am I actually just yapping into the void? Either way, if I am yapping into the void, I'm still going to do it, because the action is rooted in preference, not in external outcomes. Actions and goals are expressions of values, not proof of self-worth. If you don't achieve a goal, your identity and self-worth is not affected. Number 4, Taking responsibilities for actions without self-collapse. When taking responsibility, you may feel regret or empathy. I mean, that's just natural, but not self-hatred, because there is no definition of the self to be hated on. Focus is naturally placed on becoming better, because there's no definition, rather than hating your current state. Admitting you were wrong doesn't make you question your competence or make you feel shame. This is also a really good balance one, I think, like, that needs to be taken into consideration. I don't want people to take this as the self-help manifestation where it's like, you just have to believe in yourself and focus on your values, and it's like really, really independently driven. No, still take responsibilities for your actions. The whole point of this is to be more objective and less biased, not more biased and ego driven. Low defensiveness, high responsiveness. You don't feel a need to prove your decisions to others because they're simply based on preference. You've already rationally viewed the situation and chosen what you'd like to do. You don't feel a need to explain, justify, or prove your preference, and instead focusing on listening or adjusting if anyone ever gives you an adverse perspective. I think this is especially true in like the feminine energy trend that was happening a few years ago. I mean, these women were promoting living a lifestyle where a man completely provides for you, and you bake bread and you have children, and that's all fine. It's all fine until you're like, this is the correct way to live, and I think everybody should ever live this way. And that's where it becomes kind of like cope. Because suddenly, if somebody is like, actually, that's not the correct way to live, they become defensive. They're like, no, you're wrong. And so they need to prove it. The proving is what signifies an attachment to the idea, to the perspective, to the ego. There we go. Number 6, intrinsic worth is never evaluated, never a focus. Without an ego, a need to define yourself concretely in your environment, there's no metric for evaluating self-worth. Self-worth does not exist. It's basically irrelevant. It does exist in like human rights scenarios, but it's not irrelevant in your day-to-day. It's not relevant in your day-to-day because the self is not something to be judged. It's something that experiences and lives in alignment with intentional preferences. Self-driven ego does not mean high self-esteem. It means no esteem at all. Because you're just experiencing. There is still that focus on experience, very similar to Buddhism, but I don't understand how Buddhism doesn't believe in the self or the soul or like a defined self. I don't know. Number 7, comfort with ambiguity and not knowing. With nothing to become, there's nothing to artificially live up to stemming from external pressures. Even this is not something to live up to. This is something to consider and also change your perspective in certain ways and understand the characteristics and the roots of this belief. You don't feel the need to rationalize an in-between and focus on simply experiencing while keeping your preferences and values in mind. Delusion. I'm so glad I actually included this. Some may read this list and apply it to extreme confidence in the self, when self-driven identity aims towards the exact opposite. Delusion is impossible when you're open to adverse opinions, are flexible, and seek understanding. A common argument. This is just how the world works. If you've instinctively scoffed at self-driven identity, it makes sense. Ego-driven identity remains in 99% of people because, I mean, including me, I don't think I apply this perfectly either. I think it's a useful concept, but takes time to apply. I think I apply most of it, but not completely 100% of the time. Ego-driven identity remains in 99% of people because they believe it's the only option to being a functioning member of society. However, please make this distinction. You don't need to internalize standards. Just acknowledge them. This is how you can relate with society. There will be societal standards, but you just need to acknowledge them. instead of opposing them. If you don't agree with them, you have to consider the effects of you not following those standards rationally and objectively. You can understand what society values and expects of you while still prioritizing yourself. Remember when I introduced the topic with the discussion of paths and seeing alternative ways of thinking or perceiving reality? How sometimes, for sake of emotional regulation, you may view a situation in a certain way? Ego-driven identity and self-driven identity are paths. That's why I call them alternatives, and therefore choices. If you understand the benefits of each one, you can choose either one if you understand how to implement them, of course. Some confusion. I think this section was honestly like kind of overkill. Like, it's just further explaining the concept of taking responsibility for your actions. I'll read it anyway. Okay. Rationalizing bad actions. It does get into important things, actually. Sometimes a connection to ego can be hard to identify. What about a criminal feeling indifferent about his harmful actions? What about a mother yelling at her child, arguing it's for the greater good? An untrained eye may view these situations and believe they aren't ego-driven and believe they are living for themselves. Like, imagine you are the mother. You're like, I'm doing it for the greater good. I'm doing it for the greater good. This is my value. And you believe it's not ego-driven, but actually it is. However, both of these scenarios don't display self-driven identity. And the main signifier is that they aren't objectively viewing reality. Both the mom and the criminal's ego blinds them from the harm they've caused. In self-driven identity, they would acknowledge tears, pain, and feel empathy. Instead, their ego rationalizes their actions, perhaps through identifying with the belief that they're a good person underneath their harm. A murderer could say he no longer identifies with his past. Was I supposed to delete this? Anyway, in this light, not identifying becomes a coping mechanism. Oh wait, no. I forgot I wrote this. A murderer could say he no longer identifies with his past, ridding himself of any negative mental consequences. A rapist could say he no longer identifies with the person he was at the time of his dehumanization. But these are ego-driven, not viewing reality objectively. In this light, not identifying becomes a coping mechanism to avoid responsibility, simply moving on without reflection, making an empty promise that you won't commit the same action, brushing it under the rug. And essentially everything that is a coping mechanism is biased and is driven in ego. Everything becomes an ever-present. None of your actions have any weight in the future. What do you do when you make a mistake, inevitably? When it comes to accountability, no, religion, I don't know if, I still agree with it. I just don't think it was the best way of presenting the idea. What does the self-driven identity look like in action? In short, there's a prioritization of current events instead of how you are related to them. You start observing instead of judging, prioritizing the best course of action in alignment with intentional values, which is a whole nother conversation. Intentional values. Instead of falling behind in life, you face instead of defining yourself as falling behind in life, you are simply facing obstacles that are not typical of an average experience. Notice how the first example was defining the self as falling behind. The second one is a description of the current events. That is what the focus is on. Those obstacles have no effect on your self-worth, but they do adjust your actions. My camera's about to die, so hold on. Okay. instead of who do I need to be, you ask, what do I want to do now? You care about goals not because you need to prove something about yourself, but because you care about the underlying intentions behind them. Suddenly you actually start focusing on the process rather than the result, which is such a common piece of advice. I think that was kind of cringy that I ended like that, but anyway. Oh, I can't like my own piece. Anyway, yeah. That was my little article. I think we just read that for funsies. I'm not gonna lie. Wait. Let me read chat. Oh my god. Twitch chat. There's like one person here. Nobody's on Twitch with me right now. Hey, can we make... Oh my god. Okay, live stream. Do you know how to let go? I think the concept of letting go is much easier to grasp, actually, than adding something. That's why I used the phrase letting go, because you can let go of societal standards, especially. I think is a good example. You can let go of societal standards while still understanding the effects. I do know how to let go. I should probably make a video about that. You want me to prove it to you? I'll prove it to you. No, literally, that's like the phrase. I think it says enlightenment is basically erasure of ego border and becoming one with everything. I'm not sure how the becoming one with everything is like a natural result of that. I don't understand how they're connected just yet. Saved me reading it later. Yay! Thanks. I'm gonna reincarnate as some sort of marijuana plant. Alright. I'm actually very anti-drug, guys. So that'll be like negative karma for me. It's so Jover. Okay. I am is all that needs to be said. Funny to me, I had a very intense meditative experience with I am as a mantra, and it blended into a noise until it became Maya, which is the illusion we perceive. That's a cool name for a child, though. Maya? Okay. Wow. I'm gonna, like, go. I'm done yapping. My voice hurts, too. That's all I have for today. Do you think next time, though, I do want to focus more on Western psychologists. I know. I like them, though. I want to learn about Carl Jung and maybe not so much Freud, but Carl Jung. Give me a brief explanation of how you let go. Oh, I fear that it was quite intuitive, and so explaining it is hard. Before you make the video, let me think about it. Because there was a specific situation where, I was identifying with my passion for traveling. I was telling myself that if I didn't travel, who am I? If I didn't travel, if I didn't have the means to, if I didn't do this, if things weren't in a very certain way, I was very attached to this idea of, being someone who's passionate about travel. And I felt so much anxiety surrounding the ability to maintain that. I thought, who would I be if not someone who follows their passions? And that just created anxiety, insecurity, like so much. And then one day I was like, low-key, that's stupid. Like, low-key, if I just low-key, it doesn't matter if I do or not. The focus should not be on traveling and what that makes me, and whether I truly am living some ideal life that I've defined to be ideal so concretely, so statically. The focus should be on the actions toward that, should be on the passion and the intention towards doing that thing, towards the actual passion, not on what the passion makes me. And I do fear that's like not a very good explanation, but that's kind of how it happened for me. I was kind of just like, one day, wait, that's kind of dumb. And then over time, I started seeing little pieces of it in my mind, like little phrases I would say to myself in my mind. And one by one, I would be like, that's stupid, that's stupid, that's stupid. Like, why would I focus on that? A lot of it is also just focus instead of changing the thought. It's like some thoughts are just kind of useless, especially focusing on like, do I deserve this? Am I valuable enough for this? This is really common in BoJack Horseman. I'm addicted to that freaking show. Actually, let me go full screen. I'm glad you enjoyed. I'm so glad you enjoyed. Just vid. Yeah. This is common in BoJack Horseman, the show. The main character is an alcoholic horse who is a objectively horrible person. But there's this one episode in which it's just his internal monologue daily. He's constantly telling himself, like, I'm a piece of shit, I'm a piece of shit. Like, that's that episode name. Like, and he's constantly, like, defining himself in that way. And I believe it's not until, like, the last season where he admits to somebody, like, I was telling myself that all day, and it took me, my therapist, somebody else telling me that, to realize how stupid it was. Because what does that actually mean? I'm a bad person? Inherently? That's what you're saying when you define yourself so concretely, so statically. It's saying inherently, I am this way, and inherently I cannot change. So, like, going to therapy, you know, he figures that out. And, I don't know, I just wanted to yap about BoJack Horseman. Seems like you had a spontaneous experience of letting go, but might not have had a full understanding of how to do it. I know. I also explained this last time, which I don't think makes sense to, like, almost anyone except myself. But seeing the self fourth dimensionally. All right, the self is not just something that can be described and defined so easily, but it is rather something that exists before, during, after, in the future. And so it's kind of like, if you're defining yourself as bad right now, inherently, you're also defining the child that was born however many years ago as bad. And so that doesn't really make sense. I don't think that makes sense to anyone but me, but hopefully you get it. Alright, well, bye-bye. Bye! I hope you had a lovely time here.